It's quite strange for a country's interpretation of a genre of video games to be so absurdly influential and unique that it spawns a genre of its own, but JRPGs have managed to do just that. Literally just role-playing games that were created by a Japanese company. JRPGs have a rich history with plenty of world-beating franchises of games. You've got Monster Hunter, Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, the list goes on. Unfortunately, as with all genres, not all JRPGs are perfect. In fact, there's quite a few bad ones. So in today's video, we're going to be going through some of the worst JRPGs in history, laughing at them, and trying to bury the memories of the crushing disappointment that followed up on their releases. Let's go. Number 5. Pokemon Sword and Shield. Do Pokemon games count as JRPGs? Well, they're role-playing games made in Japan, so yes. Though after the last 25 years, it can increasingly feel like Pokemon is a genre of its own. Regardless, 2019 saw the franchise's first mainline entry onto the Switch, as Sword and Shield hit the shelves. But the controversy with these games started way in advance of their release, when the news broke that they would not be including all the series' pre-existing Pokemon alongside the new creatures being introduced with the Galar region. Essentially, this meant that it would be impossible to catch them all in Sword and Shield, and the fan backlash was immediate. A host of social media trends hit out at the decision to leave out the national Pokédex, with many fans either protesting the games or calling on the developers to make the situation right and add all the missing Pokemon in. Game Freak were not willing to buckle under the pressure, and the launch went ahead. But rest assured, the lack of the national Pokédex is not the only issue with these games. The story is probably the worst in a Pokemon game, with an ending that will make any player outright angry that they have wasted so much time to get there. The gameplay is the same Pokemon battle gameplay you've seen for the entire history of the series, but perhaps easier than most other titles. It's difficult to actually lose a battle. The characters are relatively lifeless and uninteresting, with an oversaturation of battles between yourself and your rival in particular, making the entire affair feel so repetitive and boring. Are there worse overall games in the Pokemon series? Probably. But comparatively speaking, Sword and Shield are the worst, representing a monumental disappointment for the franchise's big move to next-gen technology, with dated graphics and dull sound design squandering the potential it had. The inclusion of DLC into a Pokemon game also just felt wrong. Number 4. Chronos Arc. Chronos Arc is a real shame because it was supposed to be something of a homage to the classic JRPG titles of the 90s, yet initially released in 2015 for the 3DS and then later released in 2018 for the Switch, falls short of those titles published over 15 years before it. The story is stale and largely unaspiring, and very quickly the game settles into an arduous, grind-heavy pattern that forces you to progress at a crawl. You fight battle after battle after battle without anything keeping you going beside the vague promise that the story will advance at some point, only for you to then have to grind all over again. Obviously, the game sells various time-saving DLCs such as XP bonuses and the like, which when added up will account for a higher price tag than the game itself. Any game that relies on a practice like this probably isn't as fun as it could be, with the overall experience of Chronos Arc just being utterly forgettable. Number 3. Quest 64. Going all the way back to 1998 for this one, Quest 64 was released for the Nintendo 64, a single-player JRPG from Imagineer. An interesting thing to note, Imagineer actually have a pretty extensive history and have been involved in a range of game series, working on the original SimCity, Doom, and a concerning amount of Hello Kitty games. Packing a suitably run-of-the-mill story, Quest 64 sees you control an apprentice mage named Brian, who goes out on a quest to find his missing father. You collect elemental gems that are being hoarded by criminals, beat a boss at the end, all that good stuff. And that's about all there is to say about Quest 64. It feels harsh, but the game was hurt a lot by its contemporaries, with the PlayStation being treated to great JRPGs of the time, such as Xenogears and Vagrant Story. There's just little to depth in essentially every facet of the game, from the threadbare story that is communicated through sporadic text boxes or the endlessly repetitive gameplay cycle. All you do is stop by a seemingly unending stream of towns, taking care of unconnected random problems that you couldn't care less for, and then move on to the next. The general consensus around the game appeared to be that anyone who's ever played an RPG in their entire life might find it satisfying, but anyone even remotely interested in the genre would become quickly bored by how rudimentary it was compared to the other games of the time. Navigation is an especially bad aspect that deserves extra attention here. The map is bland and unimaginative, making it difficult to keep track of where things are, whilst the camera itself is just utterly horrible. Number 2. Final Fantasy All the Bravest. Oh god, we're at the truly horrific entry territory. Final Fantasy is one of the pillars of the JRPG genre. There's something like a million games in the series, and for the most part, they tend to be pretty good. Of course, any series that has chalked up, let's just check, 95 across the entire series, 95 games is going to have a few duds. But All the Bravest is far more than a dud. It is the absolute worst game connected to the Final Fantasy franchise and actively diminishes the reputation of the series as a whole. It's also a mobile game, so in retrospect, we should have assumed it sucked by the second it was announced. Released in 2013 on iOS and Android, All the Bravest has a simple formula. You travel across an overhead map with a party that can number as high as 40 characters, killing various generic enemies in rather forgettable battles until you finally got to one of the bosses. It's the turn-based combat you know from most Final Fantasy games, though incredibly stripped back with an added fun twist. So in this game, when your characters die, you have to wait 3 minutes minutes for them to revive. And 3-minute periods happen one after the other. For example, if 10 of your characters fall in battle, you'll need to wait roughly half an hour for them to all be back and ready to fight. But have no fear, microtransactions are here. For a very nominal fee, you can instantly resurrect every single fallen member of your party, and that's on top of being able to purchase premium characters using your real money. I'm sure it won't shock you to learn that All the Bravest was panned by pretty much everyone who played it, with reasons like a lack of story or overly simplistic gameplay being cited as issues with the game. In my experience, those are pretty big problems. Somehow the game still charted at number 25 on the iTunes App Store, but we have forgotten how awful this game was, and neither should you. Number 1, Manakemia, Student Alliance. This one stings, because the original Manakemia game released for the PlayStation 2 in 2007 is actually a pretty decent game, but then they just had to go and ruin everything by porting it to the PSP under the title Student Alliance. Why is it so bad? Well, for one, it just doesn't work very well. A lot of PSP games seem to be cursed with horrific technical issues, and Student Alliance is no exception, with terribly optimized frame rates, criminal loading times, and an absurd level of lag that persists even when performing low-intensity actions, such as navigating the menus. Now, technical issues like this are a problem for any type of game, but with Manakemia in particular, it's just awful because the crafting and harvesting systems are so important for the core gameplay. And to craft, you need to navigate the menus a lot, meaning that a solid 85% of your time with the game is going to be you sitting there waiting as the game struggles under the weight of a simple task like viewing your inventory or checking a recipe. There was an attempt made to counteract these issues with a feature named Jumpstart that was designed to cut down the load times, but it's pretty safe to say the attempt failed miserably, given that it makes no difference at all. The fact that this game was ever released is utterly deplorable considering that it barely works in the first place. Anyone wanting to play this at the time would have been better off grabbing it on the PS2 because it generally would have run better. There are some bad games on this list, and they all deserve to be here, but at least the vast majority of them are actually playable. Manakemia Student Alliance is a laughable joke that insulted anyone who purchased it and somehow managed to be far worse than a game made with inferior technology, and that's why it's the worst JRPG of all time. And that's everything. What do you think? Were we harsh on any games? Are there any other games that you can think of to compare for the title of the worst JRPG ever? Let us know in the comments, and until next time, see you soon!